And I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Madam President, Mr. Assistant Secretary of Secretary General, Mr. Taranko, Excellencies, dear colleagues. I thank you for the opportunity to speak before the United Nations Security Council. I thank all of you for your understanding the critical situation in Ukraine and for your support. My address this Sunday's evening, I would like to start mentioning that today the Christians celebrate the great holiday, the day of the entry of our Lord into Jerusalem, the Palm Sunday. Unfortunately, today the celebration is shadowed by aggression and blood in Ukraine. On its eve, the terrorists, coordinated by the Russian Federation agents have seized the control over state buildings in several cities of Donetsk region. Let me quote today's statement of acting President of Ukraine, Alexander Turchinov, where he is mentioning that a particularly dangerous situation was in Slovyansk city, where professionally trained armed troops wearing a camouflage of the Russian armed forces, although with no insignia, have shattered the peace. This morning, a convoy of the law enforcement officers who intended to protect the citizens of Slovyansk city has been attacked by assault rifles. The criminals opened intense fire using local people as a human shield. The blood of Ukrainians has been shed for one and undivided sovereign Ukraine. This blood has been shed in a war which Russia is waging against Ukraine. The aggressor has not stopped and continues to organize unrest in the eastern regions of our country. This is not a war between Ukrainians. This situation of confrontation was artificially created with the aim to weaken and destroy Ukraine itself. End of quote. The Ukrainian government within this short period of time, around 1.5 months, have done everything possible to avoid confrontation through inclusive approach to each and every region. Recently, Mr. Yatsenyuk, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, has visited the southern and eastern regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, addressing such issues of concern as the language policy, prospects of decentralization of power, and constitutional reforms. The government is ready to consider significant empowerment of local authorities in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the efforts of the government of Ukraine have been severely challenged by recent developments in the eastern regions. According to Ukrainian intelligence data, during the last month and a half in the eastern regions of Ukraine, agents of the Russian Special Service embarked on the large-scale operations to seize power, destabilize the situation, threatening the lives of citizens of Ukraine, for the separation of those regions of our country. During the last month, our mission has been regularly informing the Security Council and all UN member states on the latest developments and Russian actions in Crimea and other regions of Ukraine. Russia has not only been constantly increasing the number of its troops alongside the Ukrainian border, but also sent subversive groups into Ukrainian regions in order to destabilize the situation. Such specially designated groups comprising of 20 members of special forces, primarily of main intelligence directorate of general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, were infiltrated into Ukrainian territory with the task to form and organize military combat units. Ukraine has strong evidence of the involvement of the Russian Special Service Forces, as it was mentioned in the relevant statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine made public early today. Detentions of the Russian citizens, members of subversive groups coordinated by the Russian Federal Security Services and military intelligence are carried out on a daily basis by the Security Service of Ukraine. Some facts of dozens. On April 8, Russian citizen Maria Koleda, who fulfilled tasks of intelligence services to destabilize the situation in the eastern Ukraine, was detained in Kherson. The Russian saboteur who was about to seize the strategic facilities such as Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant was detained in the Kherson region. On March 10, the Russian Federation Military Intelligence Service representative was detained in Donetsk. On March 12, intelligence group of the Russian armed forces that intruded the territory of Kherson region from Crimea was detained off the control points. On March 20, the Russian citizens Marco, officer of the main intelligence directorate of Russian Federation General Staff of Armed Forces, was detained in Chernigiv. On the same day, Russian citizen Oleg Bakhtiyarov, one of the Eurasian Youth Union of Russia leaders, was detained in Kiev, preparing a group of people under the guise of civil activities for criminal seizure of Verkhovna Rada, Parliament of Ukraine, and the Cabinet of Ministers. All of the arrested confirmed being the part of a network of the Russian subversive activities in Ukraine. The available radio interceptions of communications of above-mentioned groups and others with their Russian coordinators is another clear evidence. It has been also observed that such terrorist groups are heavily armed by weapons used exclusively by Russian armed forces, namely Kalashnikov assault rifle AK-100 series, also seen in the hands of Russian troops in Crimea. It can be clearly seen that the tactics of the terrorists used when capturing and seizing the administrative buildings in Donetsk, Lugansk, Kharkiv regions is absolutely the same as was used when the buildings of the Parliament of Crimea and other governmental buildings in Crimea have been captured, which can be seen on the video evidence. The terrorist groups are acting in every organized and preliminarily planned manner. One of their goals is to equip with arms and ammunition as many locally recruited marginal as possible. That is why the primary targets of terrorists have been local offices of police and security service with the weapon storages. As a result, several hundreds of guns and automatic rifles have been seized and are now in hands of terrorists. There are numerous video evidence of armed attacks with gunfire on local Ukrainian police stations in Slovyansk and Kramatorsk particularly. These videos have been widely broadcasted by international TV channels and over the web. These videos leave absolute no doubts that the terrorist groups are not the peaceful protesters, as our Russian colleagues are trying to represent it, but obviously the professional special forces appropriately equipped and armed as such of Russian Federation. Terrorists started using their weapons against Ukrainian law enforcement and military officers. This morning in Slavyansk, the auto convoy Ukrainian military was attacked with the use of automatic weapons. The terrorists shot and killed the captain of Ukrainian security service, Gennady Bilachenko, while the commander of the Alpha, Kuznetsov, and Colonel Cooks were seriously wounded, as well as one police officer, Selikhov. In view of these facts, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine has, in accordance with the law of 2003 on combating terrorism, adopted a decision to launch a large-scale counter-terrorist operation involving the special units of armed forces of Ukraine. We are not going to let the Crimea scenario repeat in the eastern Ukraine. We have not imposed the state of emergency, as it was required by the provisions of the Constitution of Ukraine. Instead, we have prepared the counterinsurgency plan to strike the armed terrorists. Acting President Alexander Turchinov, in his today's statement, accented, I quote, "I would like to emphasize that those not involved in shooting at Ukrainian law enforcement officers and who will surrender the weapons and leave seized administrative buildings will be released from prosecution." End of quote. Only a few weeks ago have passed since the part of the territory of Ukraine was annexed by the Russian Federation. And now Russia is applying the same tools, inciting separatists by waging unprecedented anti-Ukrainian propaganda in mass media, distorting the truth about Ukraine, and sending in special troops to seize administrative and law enforcement buildings with the aim of destabilizing situation in eastern regions of Ukraine and encouraging marginal groups to pursue their separatist ambitions, threatening unity and territorial integrity of my country. Apparently, by taking those efforts, they want to disrupt presidential elections in Ukraine scheduled for May 25, 2014. Russia often positions itself as a prominent fighter against international terrorism, but by sending its special agents to Ukraine for diversions and sabotage, it is actually sponsoring terrorism. The statements and position of Russia, in fact, support terrorists in Ukraine who seized administrative buildings, took over military arsenals of secret service of Ukrainian police in several cities, and opened fire on the Ukrainian police. Today, official Russian TV channels have widely broadcasted interviews with the three individuals, former President Yanukovych, ex-prosecutor General Pshonka, and ex-Interior Minister Zakharchenko, who are suspected in mass murders in Ukraine. They are wanted internationally. Ukraine requested repeatedly our Russian partners to extradite those suspects and provide necessary assistance in the investigation. Unfortunately, the Russian Federation refuses to do it. Madam President, Ukraine is under the large-scale terrorist operation orchestrated by the Russian Federation in sub-regions of eastern part of Ukraine. It constitutes a serious threat not only to the security of the people of Ukraine, but to the international peace and stability as a whole. We consider it is a duty of this Council to find a proper, peaceful solution of this crisis. We call upon Russian partners again to stop immediately actions aimed at undermining sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We demand to leave us in peace. Comme l'ambassadeur Gérard Haro dit,
as Ambassador Arrow said, it's really the final warning cry. Thank you.